That was my kid brother broke his arm. You did a good job, Doc, even if you was drunk.
Thank you, sir. Professional compliments are always pleasing. Yes, sir. What happened to that boy whose arm I fixed?
He was murdered.
Welcome, everyone, back to Let's Take 5, the podcast where we take a cinema legend and discuss their excellence and range. My name is Eric Martindale.
My name is Austin Luger.
And today we are carrying on our John Ford 5, actually ending it. The previous ones that we covered were Stagecoach, Grapes of Wrath, My Darling Clementine, The Searchers, and now we're wrapping up with The Man That Shot Liberty Valance. And we have a very, very, very special guest on the podcast this week, my dad. Say hi, Dad.
Hello, movie files.
Ray Martindale joins us on the podcast. I grew up watching a lot of John Wayne westerns with my dad and raged in many debates on who the greatest cowboy ever was, Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. The answer is, of course, Clint Eastwood. And we had that fight many times in the household, and now we actually get to talk about it here on the podcast, so that's pretty neat. And so let's take it up from here. So the movie is The Man That Shot Liberty Valance. It stars Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne. Jimmy Stewart is an Easterling coming out to the West in a town that's just starting to get settled. And in this town, he runs into Tom Donovan, I think is the name, and he recounts a tale. We see this story is told non-linearly, and it recounts a tale about the man that shot Liberty Valance. Liberty Valance is a local bandit and thug that terrorizes the townsfolk, and that's basically it as far as the premise is concerned, and we're going to get into maybe the socio-economic, political struggles that happen in the film as well. Anyways, let's kick it to our guest first. Dad, what do you think of this film?
I really like it. It's really one of my favorite John Wayne movies. Having said that, one of the main reasons it is because it has my all-time favorite actor from the Golden Age, Jimmy Stewart, in it.
Jimmy Stewart, of course, covered on one of our previous 5.
Yeah, he's my all-time favorite. But, I mean, it's got a tremendous supporting cast. Not only the co-stars like Andy Devine and Vera Miles, and Lee Marvin, but I mean they have people in this like Denver Pyle and John Carradine and Strother Martin and Lee Van Cleef. I mean it's a star-studded cast from top to bottom.
Yeah, it's really crowded when Lee Van Cleef isn't your biggest badass in the movie, and in fact is probably more like 5th or 6th.
Exactly. He probably has 5 lines maybe in the movie, but it's just a tremendous cast. I also love in any movie this flashback format. I've always loved that. Create a mystery to start the movie and then start telling, how you got to that point. And of course, the final thing I like is this twist of who shot Liberty Valance that reveals itself close to the end there. It's a great little twist. So I think those are the reasons why I really like this movie a lot.
It is such an amazing film to rewatch. I loved it even more this second time. And that flashback format, it's something that I always like. Sometimes I find it to be a little cheesy. It's perfect here because it's all about that nature of the truth and the legend, right? I mean, essentially.
Yeah, I agree.
This is just one guy recounting this thing, and it's an attempt to get the truth out there, and it's ultimately shut down by the end.
Yeah, because Jimmy Stewart, what we learned from the very beginning of the film, we have a much older Jimmy Stewart walking around, and he is this senator, and he's very, very popular amongst the locals. And the reason for this is basically, the way you feel it is, it's presented that the reason he's so popular and his popularity all stems from this myth that he's the man that shot Liberty Valance. And so much like the legendary great westerns the Western in the United States is sort of like the medieval era in Europe, right? Like we have these legends, they have the Arthurian legends, we have Billy the Kid, we have Wyatt Earp, we have people like that. And so many of these stories end up being legendary and seem to inhabit characters that seem much larger than life. I mean, Wyatt Earp is a real person, but in this sort of thing, he's just trying to tell the truth, and the truth, unfortunately, isn't as good as the legend, right?
I agree 100%. Yeah, the Wyatt Earp did exist, but the legend was something else.
And it's interesting because this legendary moment of the idea that this character shot Liberty Valance is ultimately something that kind of goes against what he is, right? I mean, he is the man who is bringing in education, the law, actual law and order, literally, and him breaking that format in a moment of like actual murder. It wasn't self-defense. He brought him out there.
That's exactly right. Rare is the movie where the murderer is really the hero.
Yeah.
Particularly in a film that seems to judge the people that would do the murdering.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was really interesting. Austin, you had a point?
Yeah, no, it is that amazing contradiction. It was such a cool performance by John Wayne, because so much in the first half of the movie you have Jimmy Stewart literally kind of screaming at him about his ethics and how this town runs. And then the town and then the country loves him for breaking that rule, while still applauding him for his rules. It is... I watched it with my girlfriend today, and it's one of her favorite movies, and she said this was the murder that ended like the Old West, essentially.
Exactly. That's what I think is really kind of cool about this movie, because this is a really late Hollywood Western at this point. I mean, we're like 7-8 years after The Searchers, even at this point, something like that. So we're at the tail end of that Hollywood Western that's shaped by John Ford and John Wayne, starting with Stagecoach in 1939. And in this movie here, it's art sort of imitating life a little bit here, because they never actually give a specific date, but there's a lot of conversations about territories and statehood and vying for statehood and politics and literacy sort of invading this wild Western land where the Wild West is dying, right? And I love Westerns set in this period. I love any type of Western stories set in this period, and stories in general focusing around times of change, because there's so much rich content here to sort of go with. This movie is a Western, but it's also a deeply political film. This movie is about the building of cities and the building of civilizations. And there have been people comment on this, way before I did. I mean, the movie's been around from 1962, saying that this is like one of the great American political dramas ever, too. So anyway, I was really captivated by that. I mean, other than the fact that, of course, you have John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart in the same movie, and that's just awesome, too. And Lee Marvin is also great in this film.
But it's interesting because we covered My Darling Clementine a few weeks ago, and that was another movie about kind of, the West kind of dying out. This movie feels even better because it feels like also it's time for the Western genre to die as the way we know it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it is kind of like putting an end to the Hollywood Western of, like, we're going to question these myths of these people. We talked about, last week with The Searchers. It's really kind of dissecting the John Wayne cowboy. And John Wayne is, in many ways, like, on paper, the kind of hero he's been in since, Stagecoach and whatnot. But he's just so unhappy in this movie. He doesn't have the satisfaction of shooting Liberty Valance or anything
he doesn't even get that. I want to kick it to you here, Dad, because I know that John Wayne is, well, I'll let you say, why is John Wayne the greatest cowboy of all time?
Well, I think John Wayne just exemplified not only what most people saw in their mind's eye as a cowboy or a great cowboy, but he was also someone that people, particularly during his era of popularity, that was a true American, if you will. I mean, there was no doubt where he stood on didn't straddle the fence. He was pro-American, and that appealed to many people during that time. And he just was a character. His cowboy character almost became who he was almost. You did say earlier that you believe that Clint Eastwood is the greater cowboy. I really think it is a two-horse race, but I would still give the edge to John Wayne. He was just a man's man, the optimum of what you thought in your mind's eye what a cowboy would be. He normally was the hero.
He was
a great character.
He was the Hulk Hogan of equivalent to professional wrestling, right? I mean,
I guess you could say that. Yeah,
he has that. He is in this idea of the Hollywood Western and let's face it, the powerful white cowboy man hero archetype. Like John Wayne he fell into that role so naturally without, and I want to say this, I think people criticize his acting, and I actually think he can give some nuanced performances, particularly in The Searchers, but also here too. I mean, you have a story here that there's the poignant love story going on, which is very typical of the Hollywood Western at this time, but you actually have a character that's kind of in pain, right? Like, he has to make a choice to save Liberty Valance, which is a selfless act which stops him from being with the woman that he loves, and then he doesn't get to take credit for the big hero moment. Like,
that's true, but I think he's fine within himself up until the point he realizes that Hallie may love Ransom.
Right, and
it's at that point we're kind of, it's a mystery in a way. Because it basically cuts, as they tell the story, of course, Ransom goes on and he's governor, he's the ambassador to England, etc. And you really kind of don't know the mystery of Tom Donovan after that. You know, I'm thinking that maybe he took to the bottle.
I think so, yeah. I don't think he has a very happy life after this.
No, he became a drunk, was unhappy, and I mean, at the end, he's being buried in a simple pine box, and the undertaker says the county is going to pay for his burial, and there's no one there to mourn him except his friend Pompey. So, he's good up to the point that he realizes he's lost the love of his life.
Yeah, and also in that is a story about a world moving on and not needing this type of archetype anymore.
That's true.
He doesn't have a place in the world beyond the night Liberty Valance is shot.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's true.
This might be my favorite performance of his that we watched in these 5 films. He's only in 3 out of 5, but there's something about this man and this performance and this actor who does, again, fill the screen. He is that great American Hollywood actor, and yet he really kind of plays the guy in the back of the bar. Like, it's a very non-showy performance. He has gravitas when he speaks, but really he really is generous and kind of gives it to Jimmy Stewart of, like, this is your scene, this is your moment. In fact, like, you would think that with these two kind of powerhouse actors, when they're arguing about the morality of the West, essentially, he's not, like, putting up the same kind of, like, verbal fight. He doesn't need to. He can say more with less.
He's a different... It's weird, and I'm really glad that we watched The Searchers as part of this to see sort of how John Wayne... He hits, to me, like, you climax with The Searchers. That character was... I mean, some people probably argue the character, Rooster Cogburn in True Grit, but you hit a certain level of a fever pitch with Ethan in The Searchers, which... That John Wayne, I feel like, kind of put to rest now, and then now he can sort of fade in the background. He can sort of, I mean, listen, let's just be honest, the three of us. Like, there's not many screen presences that John Wayne doesn't overshadow. But if you put Jimmy Stewart next to him, that might be the one.
Yeah,
like that might be the one, because he's just probably the most famous American actor of that time or close to it.
Sure.
So. Anyway, but you're right. He can sort of fade to the background. Unlike My Darling Clementine, where Henry Fonda is just clearly the star. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Because, like, even him in Stagecoach, I mean, it's an ensemble, but he feels like a leading man.
Well, that's before he was John Wayne at that point.
Yeah, but he has that feeling, and those early scenes I thought were just so well done. And I mean, John Ford, once again, amazingly shot film, amazingly paced film, and all the small scenes feel epic. And these arguments that they're having, I just love that you have Jimmy Stewart's a man who's so desperate to convince John Wayne that he's wrong, and John Wayne just isn't interested in changing. And as everything kind of changes around him, he's stuck, and that's why I think it is a sad ending for him.
Yeah, the one thing, actually, there was a couple things that I didn't like about the movie. One of them was the filming in black and white. They supposedly Ford wanted to do it in black and white. He loved the fact that it was being done in black and white. But basically, what a lot of people felt at the time was, since the characters were older, 20 years, 25 years older than the men they were actually, or the stars, than the characters they were playing, that the black and white actually softened their features, etc., and allowed him to, maybe sell the story a little bit better by being able to show them as younger men, really, than what they were. But according to the cinematographer, he said there was only one reason, that Paramount was cutting costs. Otherwise, they'd have been in Monument Valley, just like they were in most of Ford's Westerns. But that was one of the things I didn't like. I can see a lot of people, and I'm not against black and white. For example, in the movie Lenny, Dustin Hoffman was in. I loved the black and white filming in that. I thought that was perfect, but I didn't like it really in this.
So you're saying you like the black and white whenever we're trying to evoke a certain mood at this point, but yeah, not into the black and white whenever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I don't see where this fits in with the mood, except maybe the mood that he was trying to make a 1930s film, in 1962.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting thing to question. Why is John Ford shooting in black and white here? I mean, we have The Searchers. He shot that. That was 7 years earlier. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that movie black and white. The movie needs to be color. So it is. Yeah, it's kind of a strange choice to do that.
I kind of like it a little bit. I mean, it still has a striking imagery. But I mean, with The Searchers, obviously John Ford knows how to use color like no one else. But having it be in black and white, I forget that it is a '60s film. It makes me think it's a film from the '40s just based on the black and white. And so it almost feels like a secret Western of that time, while kind of talking about Westerns of that time.
It is kind of funny, though. It does soften their features, because Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne are pretty old in this movie. Mm-hmm. John Wayne, I assume, is older than Jimmy Stewart, but I'm not sure.
Wayne was 54 and Stewart was 53.
Okay, so wow. So you have them playing characters that are much younger than what they're supposed to be. And this is not the first time. Jimmy Stewart did this a lot. Mm-hmm. I always like to point at the fact in Rear Window that he says that he's not sure he wants to get with Grace Kelly because she's too old.
Is that in the movie?
Yeah, it's in Rear Window. It's burned into my mind.
Yeah, and later in this movie too, in later years, it makes it even worse because now they have to make them look older. And I mean, it's almost a pancake makeup job on Vera Miles and Jimmy Stewart later on.
Well, and what's the name of John Wayne's kind of best friend?
Pompey.
Yeah. His bald cap was rough. It needed to be even more black and white because I saw the exact line in Sweat where it stopped.
So speaking of that, I think it's kind of interesting. John Ford has often had characters in his movies or things that sort of appear, looking back on him, as with enlightened eyes, might seem a little racist. But you have The Searchers, which the point is to make the character a scary racist guy, and then that's the point. In this movie, you have a really interesting relationship that he has with Pompey, because this is right before the big civil rights movement, which would come sort of in the mid '60s. I think this is a couple years before that. I don't know. My dad lived through it. He's on the podcast. He might be able to talk about it. But he has a very interesting relationship with Pompey, right? He's like a ranch hand that works with them, and they're clearly people that love each other. And there's one point in the film where Pompey goes up to the bar and he orders a drink. The bartender starts to tell him he can't serve him because he's black, and then John Wayne's like, "No, you're going to serve him." Mm-hmm. So it's like it's kind of it's cool to see that in a movie, especially a movie back then, because we didn't get a lot of that stuff in John Ford films.
Right.
No, it was 1962, 1965. The Civil Rights Act was passed. I did live in Georgia in the early '60s. I do recall the segregated bathrooms and water fountains, etc., and all the horror that came with that. But yeah, in a way, it was almost contemporary how they treated the racial aspect of it in a way. But yeah, you mentioned Pompey can't drink at the bar, but there were two bars in town, and that's a very small town. There was a segregated bar for the Mexicans, and I suppose Pompey, and then there was the regular bar, Hank's Saloon, I think it was called.
That's right. They do feature the Mexican bar at one point, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Peter, I believe he was a German immigrant who ran the restaurant there. There was one scene where he was going to vote for their representative to the statehood convention on statehood, and he proudly displays his certificate showing that he's a citizen while he goes to vote.
It definitely
Yeah.
it definitely reminds me of that sort of that Federalist non-Federalist debate that evolves into that power to the states, power to the government that evolves into Republicans versus Democrats. I mean, it's definitely kind of has that feel because you have when it gets political, I mean at the end, because you have the two different types. You have the cattle ranchers and you have the people, the farmers. The farmers want statehood, the cattle people don't, and that's ultimately where this sort of debate sort of moves from. I mean, and it's also a battle of, again, this same thing where we could, it's always going to be fought, and we'll just keep going in circles here, but that battle of whether or not you need a gun. Mm-hmm. That's very much brought to the forefront in this movie, right?
Yeah, and it leads me to the one other, and I may be nitpicking here a bit, that thing that I didn't like in it. It was almost like Liberty Valance's demise was the sole thing that was preventing statehood. Once they got rid of Liberty, who was the gunman or the thug that enforced whatever the territorial men wanted, once he was off the scene, it seemed like, plus it was hard to believe that a town the size of Shinbone, even though this was, 120 years ago or better, was one of the main cogs or one of the main places of advancement for statehood within this territory. But it just seemed a little bit beyond belief that Liberty Valance and his persona and his presence was the one thing it seemed like might be standing in the way of statehood versus keeping it a territory.
I agree. I think it works more as a symbol than an actual piece of plot.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But it was kind of interesting though, just to see the way that Liberty Valance kind of moved. Even when he walks in and the front page of the paper says, "This guy just killed 2 more people," he is just defiant. He just kind of keeps going on with his day. He seems to just not care about law and order in a way that he does seem unbeatable, because you can try to publicly shame him, you could try to have people go after him and such, like actual law enforcement. He just doesn't care, and the movie to me really worked because I got that sense of he will only be stopped if he's shot. Because
and Lee Marvin, I mean,
oh man,
could anybody else played that part any better than Lee Marvin? I mean, he almost had a patent on that character. It seemed like in terms
he's
of
really scary. Mm-hmm. He's a really scary bad guy. And again, when I'm looking in the background, I'm being a huge fan of the Man with No Name trilogy. I look in the background, I'm seeing Lee Van Cleef, and I'm thinking that guy should be playing Liberty Valance. But then it's like as the movie goes on, and I see Lee Marvin playing it, he's a really, really scary guy, which brings me to one of the big film cliches. I think the earliest film I've witnessed it in is this movie, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing when you create the cliche. Mm-hmm. It's the guy walking into the room and turning the light on in the room, and then there are 3 people in the room about to beat him up. The newspaper man. That was really, really cool. And the lighting in the camera movement, the cinematography, the way the whole shot was set up now works to our eyes now, looking back on it. Clearly there's going to be 3 dudes in the room whenever he turns the light on. But mm-hmm. it worked really, really, really effectively, and it was super scary. Because I assumed they were going to kill him. And then it's a really, really cool. It's just a really, really cool way to set that up, and not just give the majesty to the character of Liberty Valance what he already had, but also make him a very, very scary bad guy.
Yeah, I love that scene too. I think the reason he wasn't killed was they just roughed him up, and if he died, he died, and if he didn't, he didn't. It was one of those type of things. I don't think they were trying to spare him or kill him either way. It was just
message was sent.
Yeah, the message was sent. Can he survive? His name was Dutton Peabody, the editor of the Shinbone Star, and that was another thing that was kind of humorous to me about this movie. Not unlike Dickens, the writer. I mean, listen to some of these characters: Cassius Starbuckle, Custis Buck Langhorne, Dutton Peabody, Link Appleyard,
Liberty Valance,
Handy Strong, Liberty Valance. These character names are wonderful.
They live in a town called Shinbone. That's insane.
Exactly.
Town called Shinbone. And Donovan, if you mm-hmm. see it, it's Donovan, mm-hmm. not Donovan. And then the main character's name is Ransom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would be amiss if we didn't spend a minute or two on the craziest character in fiction, Mr. Peabody. This is a man who is so angry that the bar is closed, and he's just begging for anything, just a beer. And them nominating him, like, I love that he essentially is living out in a small way the plot of Citizen Kane, but they're just kind of making him do it. Like,
I actually liked that because because The Searchers is like 50%. I talked about it last week, but 50% like greatest movie ever, 50% kind of goofy Seven Brides for Seven Brothers like comedy, like where there's this all of a sudden we're pausing to have a really goofy comedic absurdist thing happen that's kind of farcical. And this was just enough to where I was laughing. Because John Ford, does, in spite of all his talents, doesn't seem to do comedy very well. And this guy's kind of funny. I'm laughing at it.
That guy's insane. I loved him. Like, when they were doing the whole, like, the first, like, you know, here's the rules of, you know, we're going to do the nomination, we're doing the voting, whatnot. I just saw the speech going, like, don't nominate Mr. Peabody. He's insane. This guy is crazy. This guy is so horribly drunk at any moment. And I loved him. I loved him so much.
Yeah, I thought that was a great scene when they're gathered to vote. And, of course, somebody does slip him a bottle before he takes the floor to give his oratory.
Yep.
Yeah, he has to do that. Well, and what I was thinking about is the contrast into the modern day. I say modern day. I'm guessing, I'm just going to say it's by the end of the movie, it's like 1915, something like that. I'm just guessing. But how different the newspaper had changed. Because you had... in Shinbone before, like this was a startup newspaper run by one guy, and then when Ransom returns back to Shinbone to bury Tom, it's like a real newspaper. Yeah,
there's multiple journalists going on. They're really kind of taking detailed notes and getting the story right and beating to the story. I mean, they weren't like called upon here's a story. They were there already.
Yeah, there were some principles of journalism that had developed because you have them like trying to get a scoop, you know, which is not something that Peabody cared about, really.
Yeah, I mean, Dutton Peabody is really heroic in his own way in this movie. He's going to print the truth, even at his own peril. So he was a great character, you know, and a brave character. I was kind of hoping that somehow, some way, the folks that bestow Pulitzers would do so for Dutton Peabody and the Shinbone Star.
We're getting close to time here. I want to ask a question. This was something that occurred to me while we were there, or at the end of the movie. So at the very end, you have that love story of Ransom and Tom both vying for, what is her name, Hallie? Something like
Hallie.
that. Hallie, yeah. Vying for Hallie, and they both love her. And at the end of the film, you feel pretty confident before the end that the person who won this love triangle is Ransom, the Jimmy Stewart character. But at the very end, I got this weird hint that maybe he didn't. That maybe she actually loved Tom. No. Was that a note that I was supposed to have at the end of the film?
I didn't see it that way. I think it was just like, these are the two people who knew Tom was this kind of man of note and that they respected and missed.
No extra significance to the cactus blossom at the end?
I think it was just a moment of mourning and kindness and just a nice visual metaphor of rose on a cactus.
Well, it threw me off.
Yeah. I think that's quite possible, but I really felt that she loved both men. I mean, early in the movie, as she gets off the train, she climbs into the buckboard with Andy Devine, and Jimmy Stewart, Rance, says he's got to go do an interview and ask Andy to take her for a ride. And the way they look at each other, it's almost like they don't want to look at each other. Both of them know what the other's thinking. It's like he knows she wants to go see Donovan's home,
the home that he built to live with her in.
Exactly.
I mean, which is, I think, kind of significant. Also, the fact that, like, I don't know, it's like this weird feeling of, like, you know, you left. You know, you left. Because, you know, we see Andy Devine's character in this film. He was the sheriff before. This is the saddest Andy Devine I've ever seen. Like, he's usually a very, very Sagwine, like, happy-go-lucky, goofy dude with a weird voice. And he's really, really sad at the beginning of this film.
Early in the movie especially. He gives some good comic relief throughout the movie, but in that opening scene when they ride into town, especially,
Sad Andy Devine. That's the theme I'm taking away. Sad ending to mine. Yeah. Well, listen, we're gonna wrap it up here. Dad, thanks for coming on here. We're gonna do some plugs and some admin stuff. But did you have any final thoughts on the movie?
No, just that it's a great movie. If you're a John Wayne fan, if you like great casts, I would recommend this movie to anybody. And thanks for having me on tonight.
Yeah, hang out while we plug the admin stuff, and then we'll sign off. So,
okay.
Go ahead, Austin.
So yeah, thank you everyone for listening. You can leave us a comment or anything that you want to say about the man shot Liberty Valance over at theartimmortal.com. While you're there, check out some other cool podcasts. We'll do The Immortals and Ad Absurdum. If you leave us a review on iTunes, more people can find our show, and that's really cool. Special thanks to Adam Lord for the music for this, especially his very cool John Ford-styled intro for the show. Where else can we find you, Eric?
Constant Diversions, the YouTube channel. You can check me out on there.
We'll be back on Wednesday as we're going to do our John Ford wrap-up, talk about all the films we covered and the films we didn't, and announce our next 5. But truly, thank you again, Mr. Martindale, for being our guest.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And I think that about does it.
All right. My name is Austin.
My name's Eric.
And my name is Ray.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's my steak, Valance.
You heard him, dude. Pick it up.
No. Pilgrim, hold it. I said you, Valance. You pick it up.
3 against 1, Donovan.
My boy Pompey. The kitchen door.
I'll get it, Liberty.
I said you, Liberty. You pick it up.
What's the matter? Everybody in this country killed crazy? Here! There! There! Now! It's picked up!
Why don't you get yourself a fresh steak on me? Show's over for now.